This is the fourth in our series of 5 forecasting talks this week. We've had a whole series of great speakers so far. Excited to welcome Dr. Michael Gilead here today to talk about the psychology of prediction and forecasting. Michael has worked with Metaculus in the past and is very familiar with our platform and our capabilities and our vision for the future. And I think we're all really excited to hear what Michael has to say. So with that, I'll turn it over to Michael.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I'm happy that you came. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the psychology of prediction, but focus more on the research that we do in my lab. Everyone can hear me fine, right? Maybe try to talk in the middle because I can't see you, like I didn't, like Google doesn't really, I don't see your faces. So if you have questions, just barge in. You're not that many people and it's fine. Okay, so just say, it will give me a sense of not being alone in the room.
Like I'm doing right now, Michael?
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
And feel free also to, if you are, if anyone else does want to drop a message in the chat or use the raise hand feature, I can monitor that and just pause Michael in the middle of his presentation.
Yes. You could heckle me, whatever. Okay. So yes, I'm a psychologist in Tel Aviv University, and I study prediction in general, prediction in the brain, imagination, and prediction of human behavior and forecasting, all sorts of things related to this general theme. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit today, first about research we've done specifically on forecasting, and then a little bit more on the relation between machine learning and psychology and prediction. And let's see if it's interesting or not. It's not April, right? It used to be. Okay, so I don't have to convince you guys that prediction is important. Here are a set of headlines: why Putin won't invade Ukraine, stop panicking about Ukraine and Putin, the next phase of the hybrid war, or why Russia is unlikely to invade the Ukraine. It would have mattered if the world would have known that Russia was going to invade Ukraine a little bit earlier. I don't know what exactly could have been done, but stuff could have been done. I don't need to convince you of the importance of forecasting, how it can, how accurately forecasting the future can make a better future. And you probably know that it's not impossible to predict the future, because I think many of you really are into it. And you know that some people are better at it than others. I'm not going to go into the research by Tetlock. He can give a much better talk at explaining individual differences, strategies, and the sort of tools that you can apply and learn to improve your forecasting skills. I'm sure that many of you are already are pretty well versed in what is known in terms of applying these strategies and what is known about individual differences. So it means that we can do something to predict the future a little bit better. For example, we know that wisdom of the crowds works a lot of the times. And we know that there are applications of artificial intelligence and machine learning that can help us. So all of these things render the future slightly less unknown. But I missed a slide, sorry. So there is an issue, though, with using machine learning models and using artificial intelligence. Sort of the problem of forecasting doesn't really cohere with the sort of logic that underlies AI. Typically, when we try to predict geopolitical events such as the invasion of Ukraine, we don't have that many past examples, right? Our ability to use inductive modeling is not great. We need to build a model on the fly pretty flexible model that accounts for specific circumstances. There's a need to integrate a lot of knowledge about the world and sort of quantify it. You've been there, it's difficult. And right now, AI doesn't know how to do that. It's the logic of AI. If you see how GPT stuns all of us, right? But it stuns all of us because it has so many examples to learn from. Basically, a corpus of human language for decades of decades. And this doesn't apply in the case of this single-shot, unique predictions. Doesn't seem that the regular logic of AI works. And I'm going to talk about a solution, one particular solution that we're working on. A lot of people are working on different solutions, but we're trying to combine the inferential abilities of machine learning and humans' ability to build novel models, to build creative models of the world, to combine them by identifying patterns in humans, in their reasoning, that correlate with accuracy. So what we're trying to do now is extract the mental models that people have when they approach a specific question, and find whether there are all sorts of generalizations we can identify with machine learning to see which people are more likely to be accurate in a given situation. Are you with me so far? I guess so. So in this project, the first project that I'm going to talk about, we ask whether we can predict whether a prediction is likely to be correct. And we teamed up, maybe some of you were participants in this forecasting contest, which we did with Metaculous. The awards totaled $10,000. We had lay people and experts, 14 questions. So, for example, will the loser of the 2020 election admit defeat? And here's a really good rationale by someone. Oh, the thing that was unique in this contest was that we asked participants to generate relatively lengthy, detailed rationales. We're doing all sorts of things with that. For example, we're also looking at what types of rationales are convincing to other people. So we're not only looking at accuracy, but also looking at the extent to which people heed the advice of people. What makes a rationale convincing? What makes a forecaster convincing to others? Because it's important, right? If you predict something accurately and no one listens, it doesn't matter. So we're looking at that. And another thing we looked at in these rationales is to find whether we have some patterns, linguistic patterns, that we can use to identify whether a given rationale is associated with accuracy. Here's a very good rationale for the question of will Biden or Trump concede the election by November 17th? And I don't know, maybe it's one of you guys, said that it is unlikely that Trump or Biden will concede for 3 reasons. Biden is likely to win the election, which he did, so conceding will fall on Trump. Trump has already alleged that his loss will be due to voter fraud, especially from mail-in ballots, etc., right? A pretty good rationale. And the question is whether there is some clue here, some hint, not in the question itself, not in the topic, but in the way the person discusses it, that sort of insinuates that we should listen to this person's advice. So there are different ways to address such textual data and such prediction problems that don't rely on huge data, but on relatively small data. And our approach often, sometimes we use, when we model textual data, we try to use BERT, GPT, but they are not actually our go-to when we deal with relatively small data sets, which often is the case when you try to deal with human participants. In this case, we had roughly, I think, 1,500 observations, 1,500 rationales. So that's not a huge amount of data to train on. So what we do in these situations is rely on simple models. We rely on theory-driven models where we seek features, engineered linguistic features that sort of relate to things that have been found in the literature to be important, that are intuitively sound to us as something that could be a meaningful feature. So we have this list of, I think, 600 features that we routinely use and extract from text, and found that this vector of features, vector of linguistic dimensions, is useful in prediction. In the case of the forecasting challenge, we looked at stuff like the certainty level expressed in the text, the level of emotionality, whether there are hints of dichotomous thinking, text complexity, the number of themes that are. So we use all sorts of automated natural language processing methods that extract values for these theoretical variables, and then use relatively simple models, such as regularized regression models, in case you're aware of these different types of models, relatively simple models in relatively simple machine learning models to fit the best model that we can. Are you with me so far? I hope it's somewhat interesting. Let's.
Almost everyone has their cameras off, but we have at least one commentary of someone saying yes, they're following along.
Okay, great. That's all I need. One person. Okay, so no. Okay, so let's blah 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 blah. In this continuation of this lecture, when I'm going to talk about our ability to predict, I'm going to use a metric called binomial effect size display. It's a way to convert effect sizes, things like ROC curves and Cohen's d, to a common currency, and I'm going to present it with. It basically reflects the difference from chance, how much information you have about chance. We know that much of physics gives us a pretty good, basically explains, a good physical model can explain 100% of the variance in a given phenomenon. Astrology, nothing at all. And as you see this box fuller, that means that we are closer to physics than to astrology. So I'm going to present to you boxes that reflect the binomial effect size display. If the box is full, we're at physics. If it's empty, we're at astrology. And basically, when we tried...
We do have more people in the chat who are responding that this is very interesting and that they're following along. So there's folks out there who are definitely engaged here.
Great, I'm happy. Okay, so when we're looking at this, the held out test data performance for the prediction of prediction accuracy, you can see where we are. We are somewhat green and somewhat red, so it's not a bad classification accuracy. Somewhere in the area of a little bit towards the 80% accuracy. So closer perhaps to physics than to astrology. So we're writing up this paper now, soon should be published. But as I said, there's a problem with ML models, and so we need to make sure that these models generalize well. We did all we can to make sure generalization. You know, there are all sorts of gold standard methods like cross-validation, leaving out the test set, but still we need to find more data to see whether the model that we found can be a tool to be for forecasting. And the question is, you may ask then is, okay, this is sort of old news. You're talking about ML methods that are basically classic statistics with a twist. And now we're watching GPT and we're watching DALI, and it revolutionizes everything. So sure, maybe in the past, machine learning AI wasn't that suitable for geopolitical forecasting, but maybe it's a matter of 5 years, 6 years, 7 years until this happens. Okay? But then you can understand this question, right? You might have asked yourself this question as well. If you're heavily invested in forecasting and you see how GPT works amazingly, you might think maybe general AI is coming. Like, I don't know if you've seen Westworld. There's this AI there that predicts everything, right? Rechovam, something like that. I don't know how it's called in there. So maybe we're going in that direction, right? But we need to remember that that when we're talking about geopolitical forecasts, basically we're talking about psychological forecasts. Not only, obviously, the chance that I don't know, that a new virus will emerge in the next year also has to do with non-human factors, like I don't know how bats are feeling or how whatever. But if you look, we just sampled the questions. These are the questions that we had in our tournament, but I think it's a pretty good sample of the type of questions that we care about in the context of forecasting. Many of them have a really major element of psychological predictions. For example, on January 1st, 2021, will Americans' opposition to Black Lives Matter be higher than 40%? Okay, so this is a social issue, obviously, but social psychological issue, still the minds of specific individuals play a role here, right? They make up their minds, and their attitudes is something that is the purview of psychology. Whether will Joe Biden or Donald Trump concede has a lot to do with the psychology of Donald Trump, okay? And all of these things, you're not necessarily, when you make your forecast, you don't necessarily try to get into the mind of the individual. You might rely on past behavior, you might rely on more general theories such as economic theories, or all sorts of perspectives that don't look into the mind of a specific individual, but the behavior is causally generated by humans and their psychology in many cases. Voter turnout, and even something like the cases of COVID-19 also has to do with how fearful individuals would be, how willing they will be to accept restrictions, all of these things. So what I'm trying to say is that when we're thinking about geopolitical forecasts, we should also really care about psychological forecasts. And we should ask ourselves, first, what is the level of understanding of human psychology that we have right now, for example, in psychology? And also, what is the potential that human psychology is really chaotic in a way that will render general AI that is a strong forecaster just impossible. So I'm going to I have like how much time do I have? Like 20 more minutes, 22 more minutes? No, a little bit more, right?
Maybe like 22 more minutes, like all in, but it'd be great to have some time for questions too.
Okay, so I'll run through it very quickly. So the question is, how predictable are we? And this is one of the major things that I deal with in my research. In general, looking at a specific individual, how good are we right now at predicting the behavior of this person with all of our psychological theories and tools and measures and machine learning and whatever? How far can we go? And I'm going to talk about 5 case studies very briefly. delinquent behavior, intelligence, depression, suicide. The predictive modeling workflow that I'm going to present to you in all of these cases resembles the workflow of a specific forecasting tournaments. We try to do this either in the context of contests where teams of people try to predict human behavior, or in the context of systematically holding out the data, building our model, pre-registering it, sending it through the mail, and then seeing afterwards whether it worked or not. So to make sure that we are not overfitting the data, we have to be principled in our approach. And first, when we ask how predictable are we should know, for example, that Facebook really is, through machine learning, simple machine learning, it's possible to know your personality just as well as your spouse. I don't know if you know this research by Michal Kosinski and colleagues, but basically, this is the My Personality research that was the basis of the Cambridge Analytica scandal. They sort of mimicked what Michal did in his models. And Michal showed in papers that with when you have enough data from Facebook likes, you can infer personality dimensions of individuals from their online footprint with really good accuracy. You see here the level of accuracy achieved by, I think it's actually upside down. I think this is your spouse and this is Facebook, but they're very similar. You see that the green is pretty substantive, and that your spouse, your wife, your husband is basically just as good at predicting your responses to personality questionnaires as a machine learning model, a simple one. Okay, so knowing a person's personality indirectly, you can do that. Okay, so this is something which you know. But then the question is whether knowing your personality matters. I don't know if you know, you probably do, that psychologists typically use a model of personality called the 5-factor model, 5 dimensions of individual differences that have been found to be meaningful. So we have openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. All of us supposedly fall on these 5 spectra, and as I said, these dimensions can be known from our online behavior. There are all sorts of models that do this, but there's a question of whether it matters, whether the best model that we have right now as psychologists, whether it predicts our behavior, our attitudes, whatever, whether it's a good model. We should probably see where it is right now in terms of our capacities, because of the Cambridge Analytica scandal, because we are so exposed, and perhaps we're then exposed also to all sorts of manipulation. So we did a sort of a test case of this to study whether inferring your personality from your online footprints can predict behavior. And we did this with Professor Lyle Ungar, and basically used their model for predicting emotions from social media, predicting personality from social media of NBA players. So Lyle's model is able to predict with pretty good accuracy and the personality of individuals from Twitter with sufficient Twitter data. So we downloaded the Twitter data for 250 American players, and we assessed their personality on each of the 5 dimensions, okay? And we made sure to the best of our ability that they are actually the ones using the writing the tweets. Sometimes they have PR teams, so we could find them through, like, whether this is through an app or through their phone. And the question was whether we can use what we know about their personality, which we do know, to infer whether they are to predict their number of technical offenses. Okay, and we were able to do this above chance, above a coin toss. But as you can see, a lot of red or pink or whatever this color is, and not a lot of green. So despite the fact that our personality model should have been pretty accurate based on past research, we were able to predict the delinquent behavior, technical file data. It wasn't that great. This could mean that we shouldn't worry, that it's just impossible to predict human behavior from personality, or that the current model that we use as psychologists is not that good. And I'm really going to run through a project where we are basically developing an alternative to the Big Five model using supervised learning. Not going.
Hey, Michael, can I pause you for a second?
Yeah.
We had a follow-up question about the basketball work, which was were you trying to predict behavior in a multi-actor game or with just one guy at a time?
A multi-actor. So basically, we had the technical offenses per minute for each of the 250 players. Okay. And some players have more technical offenses. Draymond Green, I don't know, lots of players that they're prone to losing their temper, and sometimes it's sort of deleterious to the team. Sometimes it can even be something positive, but it's a behavior. It's a behavior in a high stakes situation, and we try to see whether it's possible to predict this from online footprint, inferring personality, etc. So yeah, it's in the context of actual games. Okay.
Cool. And we have another follow-up question, which is, do these models, like the Facebook ML model and similar, work by translating likes to estimates of the Big Five characteristics and then predicting answers using only these 5 variables? Or is there something more complex going on under the hood?
Okay. For example, this model, basically, to the best of my recollection, sort of use the unsupervised dimensionality reduction on the like data, sort of because it's so sparse. You can like all sorts of stuff. So they looked at they tried to find clusters of likes, and then they had a description of you in terms of which cluster of likes, you had a vector of these relatively low dimension representations of your likes. And then they just ran what is known, I think, as a lasso regression, some sort of a regression, a very multivariate regression with many variables and big data. They had something like, I think, 1 million individuals in this data set, similarly to Cambridge Analytica. So they had the like data, they had actual responses to personality questionnaires for these individuals, and they could then they had the labels for the data, they had the predictor variables, and they could infer, they could generate a weighted function of the likes to each of the 5 dimensions and test whether it works or not, and it worked pretty well. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Cool. So again, we're using the My Personality data set for 400,000 participants. It's already published. You can look at it. It's you can email me if you want. It's already published, and there's code, so you can use this model yourself. Basically, 400,000 people gave informed consent, unlike Cambridge Analytica. Answered questionnaires, gave access to their Facebook data, and we tried to find a low-dimensional representation of questionnaire answers, so to generate this parsimonious representation of personality that, unlike the Big Five, is tuned towards maximizing predictive accuracy across a host of meaningful outcome variables. So without going into the details too much, we tried to find an alternative to the Big Five using machine learning, all sorts of outcomes, psychological outcomes that are meaningful, like intelligence, number of friends on Facebook, risky behavior, political attitudes, trying to find a sort of model that is really best at predicting. And this alternative to the Big Five worked better. We call it the predictive 5, and it works better than the Big Five. You can see here, for example, the ability of predicting an individual's score on an intelligence test from a personality questionnaire. You have 100 questions that you answer. I like my mother, I like burning stuff, etc. And you rate yourself on all of these dimensions. And from these answers, we have a function that can predict your intelligence pretty well, better than the big five. Okay? Are you with me so far? Sort of.
Yeah, I think people are linking to different papers in the comments, so everyone is quite engaged. Continue on.
Sorry. Okay, another thing that, so we're talking here a little bit about dangers, but another project we took part in is trying to predict psychopathology. And this was a pretty interesting project. The data was essays by 9,000 British children that they wrote at the age of 10. And the UK agency that collected this data followed these people for 40 years and acquired information about their level of psychological distress. And this was basically a shared task between lots of teams that tried to build the best language model to predict depression at the age of 40. I won't give you the exact text that they wrote because it's I don't know, maybe it's personal and it's recorded, but basically there was these texts describing how I see my life when I'm older, and all sorts of teams of computer scientists and psychologists tried to predict using these texts depression at the age of 40, at the age of 20. There were several challenges. Many of the teams used purely data-driven approaches, again using neural networks, BERT, GPT, etc. And because we are psychologists, we did try to use theory-driven approaches. To give just one vivid example, there were lots of grammatical errors and spelling errors in the texts. So the computer scientists automatically corrected for these so that the model won't have a problem. We also corrected for these, but we also kept track of how many spelling errors were there in a given text. We thought this could be a meaningful feature, okay, for predicting distress. Why? Because of dyslexia, because it could relate to what is called in psychology the negative manifold. The negative manifold is that bad things go together. So dyslexia goes together with depression, goes together with poverty. So any sort of evidence for negative things is useful. We looked at the voice, the passive voice. We have other research showing from our lab showing that passive voice is correlated with depression. So people who use a more passive voice tend to be more depressed. Use the linguistic inquiry word count features. So this whole list of features, using again a pretty simple model, not out of stupidity, but out of really trying what will be the best. And you can see here our prediction results. At the age of 11, which is, we had pretty good predictions from the text. And at adulthood, you can see also, this is, I think, 40. At the age of 40, predicting a level of depression from text written at the age of 10. So in this challenge, our model was the best one, beat all of the data-driven models. One last thing I want to talk about is the prediction of suicide. This is obviously very meaningful. And again, this is a very similar task, this time very small data, 200 suicide attempts, 200 controls. Suicide data was contributed by family members for the sake of research. And here what we did, we approached this because it's such small data using Bayesian modeling. We looked at past research. We took parameters estimates from the past research and sort of applied a Bayesian inductive workflow. Again, using all sorts of theory-derived features from past literature. And this in this case, suicide prediction, this was the best model. Again, beating all of these AI models that are based on data-driven prediction. So how predictable are we? Sort of predictable. We can predict IQ tests by knowing your personality with our new model at 70% accuracy. Predicting whether a geopolitical prediction would be accurate at 80%. So pretty good accuracy for that. But other behaviors we weren't able so far to predict. Just 56% accuracy for predicting technical fouls, etc. And so these are the people I've worked with. And I think the take home is that right now, psychology is still struggling, still working on generating more predictive models of behavior. And it's a question whether at a certain point, AI will use our models, find its own models, find new ways of modeling human behavior and psychology. But it's still bounded by the sort of information it gets. I'm not sure that the language people use will suffice to generate really predictive models of our personality. And therefore, it could be that for a very long time at least, still the challenge of geopolitical forecasting will not be solved by AI, and you guys will still be relevant, and me as well. Okay, this is what I had, and I'd be happy to answer questions now.
Cool. Thank you so much, Michael. If people want to just use the raise hand feature if they have any questions. Christian. This Christian's Dan calling in from the Taculus offsite.
Hi, Michael. Great talk.
Hi.
So if machine learning models are more predictive than traditional psychology models, do you expect that we will come up with new psychology models that will, say, replace big five personality traits based on certain things that these models learn?
Yes, like this is what we're working on. The question will be then, what is the inputs for these models? What will be the source data that they will use? And will they be explainable? Will they find new insights? I think I can imagine a future, for example, where you take the genome, maybe 23andMe, or some, I don't know, other equivalent of 23andMe that is not well regulated, takes the genome of individuals, takes lots of behavioral outcomes, and then uses machine learning on the genome to try to find a low-dimensional representation of the genome that predicts meaningful life outcomes, as we have in terms of, for example, not a parsimonious model, but we have like a model that predicts well educational attainment from the genome. So the question is whether there will be a general model that is based on the genes, and then we'll try to maybe infer what does this model stand for, what makes this model good, what is it correlated with in terms of features that we can understand, that we can talk about. So yes, I would predict that in the future, the incorporation of machine learning and psychology would generate different models than the big five. The big five doesn't do a lot of work right now. There was a comment.
I'll read it. I can't get the full comment in, but I was basically following up on what you were talking about with basketball players taking fouls. Basketball players, they don't just act on their own when they take fouls. Like, it's a complex negotiation with the refs.
Yeah.
You have circumstances like I messed up that last call, so I have to give you one, or I have to give the other team a BS foul to make up for it. So it's not surprising to me that a model that was based on individual personality characteristics without putting multiple actors on the board would struggle with a situation like that.
Right. So first, this is a classic question about psychologists since the 60s were very disappointed by their models. There's a work by psychologist Walter Mischel he talked about the personality coefficient. He said that all of our models, it's pretty big 5, but it's still, the score still stays the same. All of our models predict behavior with a correlation of 0.3. Okay, not very significant. Maybe accuracy, if you translate it to accuracy, maybe something in the 60s. Okay, 60%. Not a lot. And then the question was, maybe it's all in the situation, in the incentive structure. To what extent does our personality, does our psychology shape outcomes? Maybe you should have a really good model of situations rather than psychologies of specific individuals, right? These are the type of models that we have, for example, in economics, or okay, not good models, but they try to explain behavior through recourse to the world rather than to the psychology. They assume homo economicus, they assume a specific individual, and they're not good models, no, sorry. They assume that you're a rational actor, and then they start with this. But, on the aggregate, sometimes they do work, but I don't know, you guys know better, but not
I wouldn't assume that, Michael.
What?
I wouldn't assume that we know better.
You would assume that?
You said something like, I would assume that you guys know better, or that economists know better, and I wouldn't assume that. Oh,
okay. No, I would assume that maybe some of you know how good the models are in economics. I studied economics, but I don't remember anything. So basically, there is this question of how much can you expect? How much can you expect from a model? But when you look at the long run behavior of an actor, of a player, their yearly or multi-year percentage of technical fouls per minute, perhaps you could have expected there to be some sort of something real to be predicted. Obviously, in a specific situation, in a specific game, maybe it's too chaotic as it is to predict, a specific geopolitical forecast. But you would hope that, I don't know if you would hope, but you might guess that on the long run, there could be a there that will determine whether a specific player is more likely to generate many technical fouls. And they do differ. There is reliable variance there. We also check that. So Draymond Green, for example, reliably across the numerous years in the NBA, is one of the top players in terms of technical fouls. Okay, so it's not as if it's completely random. There is some systematic variance there. But we're not able to account for it very well still. And there is a lot of non-systematic variance, a lot of importance for the situation. But I still think that when we get better models, as we try to do, we'll be able to account for more of the behavior for good or for bad.
Thanks, Michael. We are coming up to time, but I see we have one final question. So Christian/Metaculus team, will this be a fairly short question that we can sneak in? Let's try. You're on mute still.
Yes, it is a short question.
Fabulous.
I'm wondering if your data can be used to predict more specific types of bad forecasting. Is it, are people overly confident or underconfident or biased in specific ways?
Yeah, I think so. This is actually, we're really interested in doing that and teaming up with Metaculus to maybe using some of your data to talk to Anastasia about that. I think it could be, there's a good chance that we'll be able to generate some predictive accuracy there in specific questions, that specific attributes of forecasting that then can be informative for general question of forecasting accuracy. I'm really
great question, Gustavo, to end us on. And Michael, thank you so much for your time and sharing your insight.
It was fine. It was what you wanted, sort of
Absolutely. Lots of great conversation. I'm sure it'll feed into future collaborations and conversations that we're having as a team, and hopefully other people are